Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that will work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Collin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by a couple Predictable Revenue friends. We've got Grant Norman and Cristina Esposto. I didn't set it right this time. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Collin.
Thanks for joining me. This is a bit of a special episode. It's going to be a little bit shorter than we normally do. And instead of talking about, a particular sales tactic or going deep with a couple sales leaders, today we want to do a little bit of something we don't do very often and talk a little bit about predictable revenue. And specifically some changes that you might have seen already and some changes that you're going to see coming up over the next couple of days, weeks, and months. The biggest one that you may have already seen is, myself back on the podcast. That sort of happened last year. But we've added some new team members. You may not have met Gray or Cristina if you haven't listened to all the episodes. So there's been quite a big bit of a change at Predictable Revenue in terms of bringing in some fresh blood. We've also added some new services, which we're going to talk a little bit about later. And I think most relevant to people in the audience is we're going to talk about the new Predictable Revenue methodology. This has been a challenging methodology to rewrite. The book is 12 years old, based on experience from Aaron's experience from 2002, 2003, and so it has been an interesting diff of what was current then and what have we learned since, what's relevant now. And I hear a lot of people talk about Predictable Revenue being this old book and it's irrelevant and this and that, and there are certain points. I mean, it is a 12-year-old book based on 20-year-old experience, so there are some probably good points there. I think my favorite part of Predictable Revenue was always the specialization of your sales roles. That, to me, the salespeople shouldn't prospect, specialize the sales roles. That was the piece that really stuck to me. And I think when I first read it, and I think that's the piece that's still extremely relevant. I think that we've learned quite a bit over the last 10, 11 years about when to and when not to and how to. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about not just what's changed, but what we've learned. And in the form of a new methodology, we'll talk a little bit more about the 4 core processes. And to cap that all off, we've got a new brand and some visuals that are going to be launching in the next week that you're going to start to see a different look to the podcast, a different look to our site, our social media, and all those things. Before we get into all of those details, Gray, Cristina, I'd love, can you just give me a short intro on yourself, what you do here at PR, and your sort of area of responsibility?
Yeah, you bet. Do you want me to go first?
You betcha. Yeah.
Awesome. So I am one of the sales and strategy consultants here at PR. I have been here a year and 4 months now, which is crazy because I honestly feel like I started like a second ago. Actually, Collin and I were talking about this a few days ago that I went back and I was like, how many clients have I actually worked with at this time? And we're up to 40. So I personally have worked with 40 clients over the past year and 4 months, which is mind-blowing to me. But yeah, career-long sales person. I've been selling since what feels like out of the womb. Every job I've ever had turns into sales, whether I wanted it to or not. And I've literally done every type of sales known to man. So, door-to-door and telemarketing as a kid and everything in between all the way up to enterprise. I've also had every position along the way too. So I've had the VP title, I've led and grown sales teams, and, like I said, grunt role from the get-go. So, and through all those years, it's amazing how many mistakes you make along the way. So now in coaching and consulting, I get to, really encourage people not to make the same mistakes that I made along the way. So it's been fun.
Totally. I think one of the things that I loved about your experience when we were, looking at bringing you on to PR was the experience that you had with Our Town, which is a startup friend of mine. And I would say the sine wave of like success, failure that every startup goes through is something that is impossible to coach to or to help somebody with unless you've been there and lived it yourself. And I know you were the first AE for Our Town.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think it was like employee number 4 or something. Right. And yeah,
Yeah.
it was insane.
And that's such a great amount of, or a great kind of relevant experience to draw from, because so many of our customers are either in that, 0 to a million phase when they're trying to get up and going, and you've been there, or that's impossible. And then getting to the like 1 to 10 is like really hard.
Really hard.
And so like, I love that you've kind of seen both of those sides of the equation, which is really fun.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that, because when I was with our town, I was contemplating on going in and getting my MBA. And I remember Luke, the CEO, going, you're getting your MBA. It's like, it does not get any better than this. Like anything you're going to learn in school, you're getting in spades over here. So like, don't worry about it. He couldn't have been more, not that I'm knocking education, but he could have been more right of having to go through that. It's a really tough thing to teach and to have people really understand.
Totally. On the other side, we have Gray here. And the piece I loved about your experience was the coming from Tugboat Logic and getting the chance to build that first sales development team. Or I think you started out as a SDR there, right?
Yeah. I started as an SDR at Tugboat. We saw a lot of success there and grew to a really big SDR team, really successful SDR team. And we were acquired by OneTrust. We were able to see like how important the SDR team is, and they kind of joined a big SDR team there, and it was awesome to see all of that join and them kind of kick off GRC outbound prospecting for OneTrust. So I've been at Predictable Revenue for a year. I think pretty soon, in like the next week. And yeah, really fast, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah, the next couple of weeks for sure. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what I was brought in, but I'm pretty sure I was brought in to help modernize and move to best practices around sales development. It's like, if you're an SDR leader, you've seen how much everything has changed in the last 3 or 4 years. Everything from email deliverability, 3 or 4 years ago, everybody was saying calling is dead. And now you're seeing it one of the most effective channels. And everything kind of goes in cycles, and you constantly have to change and adapt. That's what we've done at Predictable Revenue. It's been exciting to see the results.
It's been incredible to see the results of the SDR team, similar team, and just producing a multiple of results compared to, before Gray had joined. So you've done a truly fantastic job here. And It's been fun to see, especially with all the change. I mean, that's one thing that's, it may be interesting to talk about. We could spend a few minutes on, and I know if you're listening, you're like, oh no, not this again. Because the last couple episodes we've talked a little bit about change, and I promise I'll keep the like AI and Clay talk to a minimum as much as I can. But I'd love to hear from both of you. Sort of, what do you think has changed, or what have been the big changes that you've seen in the last few years, the last 10 years? Whatever time frame you choose. Why don't we start with Gray, then we'll go to Cristina.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the biggest change for me was like sales engagement platforms like Outreach and SalesLoft. And, it was crazy to see the kind of automation. And obviously they're still super relevant, and you kind of need one now, part of your tech stack. But especially in the last 2 years, you've seen email deliverability become went from something like, who cares? No one cares about that stuff, to one of the most important things in setting up your sales development program. And making sure you can continue to scale it as well. Things like AI have emerged recently. We're definitely in there and using it and experimenting with it. It's going to be a staple for every SDR team. Just another tool that they'll be able to use to make them more efficient and focus on booking meetings and not researching or retyping the same email over and over again. So I'd say those are the two big things that have kind of emerged recently for sure, is sort of the IT lift that's required for SDR teams, and very recently the AI impact.
Mm-hmm. Totally. What do you think, Cristina?
I think messaging has probably been one of the biggest ones for me. Like the way we sell today was even completely different as early as 5 years ago. Like the way we spoke, how we engaged in people. It was, now when I look at messaging today that I write versus what I used to write, I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe I sold anything back on the day based off of that, right? And it's just so much more relevant and customer focused and pain focused, and really has nothing to do about the product that you're selling whatsoever. It's more, it's just like, what is their main pain? What is the impact to their business when they adopt our solution? But no one actually cares about the solution and what we do. And over here, it's just like the solution can be, you can stand on your head and spin around 3 times. Like, they don't care as long as the impact to the business is there. And to have that conversation and just to really be curious and dive deep and be more, like you say, make them the hero versus we're the hero, has completely changed from, messaging even 5 years ago.
I totally agree. I mean, to both of your point, if I think back 5 years ago, outbound was so much easier.
Oh yeah.
Like, so much easier. And I think when you were getting such crazy high reply rates and everybody picked up, and I don't want to paint the good old days like it was like, anybody could do it. But I think if you knew how to write messaging that was sort of the meta back then, it was fairly straightforward. And I think the reason was there were so many fewer SDRs. But I think sales development has gotten both easier and harder, or maybe a better term would be more accessible to everybody. Because with SalesLoft and Outreach, it's very easy to scale up and build a playbook and, roll out these best practices and have 5 SDRs on your team going out and sending emails. And so at the same time, you've got, the same set of buyers, but you probably have 5 to 10x, maybe more SDRs. And so it's become a whole lot more accessible, which means there are more SDRs, which means there is more competition for the same attention on the buyer side. And I think what we've seen is, as a result, the squeeze of, in the past, it was good enough and the numbers were good enough, so you were still pushing through and you were profitable as an SDR team. I think now, if you're not following best practices and you don't have, all your processes buttoned down, it's really, really easy to kind of multiply the results of the whole by 0, because the game is just, it's gotten harder. It's gotten more accessible. Maybe not harder is not the right word, but I think there's just so much more competition for the attention.
Yeah, and an unacceptance of the status quo, I find as well. Like, because there is so much noise and there's so much landing in everybody's inbox that it's just like, unless you're going to wow me here or actually talk about something relevant or, do your homework, then why are you even bothering? Like, there's no way we're going to respond, right? So it's made everyone really have to up their game and elevate how they're reaching out.
Great. Anything to add?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Yeah, definitely. And like omnichannel, like so much stuff has changed as well. Like LinkedIn isn't what it used to be back when you could just connect and pitch to every single, 1,000 people a day and book a meeting there. Yeah, there's so much more brute force back then. And now there's a lot more finesse now. And it's almost like, I'll say that's a regression, but there's so much more focus now that like, hey, you can't just email your way to quota. You can't just email your way to pipeline anymore. There's so much more involved in that. Yeah. And the SDR role has changed too. Like it's still a junior role. But what an SDR is asked to do now is so much more than they were 4 or 5 years ago, where they got a list and like, hey, go call these people and send them emails. Not very many SDR teams are fortunate enough to still run that way.
The thing that kind of, if I think internally about like what's changed at PR, especially in the last year, it's the 2 sides of the business working closer together that has been a game changer for me. The thing that always frustrated me about PR is we had really smart people on 2 different sides of a mountain, or 2 different mountains, and there was kind of a valley in between. And it was really hard to bridge and share best practices. And the one change that, I'm really pleased with over the last 6 months, 8 months, has been those 2 sides of PR working more and more together. And it's been really interesting. The coaching has gotten better because it's not just a stale coaching playbook anymore of like stuff we had written from the book or had learned from customers or this and that. It's been battle tested with actual like live outsourcing customers. And on the flip side, I think the outsourcing has gotten better because it is no longer just focused on, we're just here to book meetings. We've got the involvement of the consulting side. And I think that the 2 coming together has helped us on the outside outsourcing side see that this is maybe the greater system involved in just booking meetings, and that sometimes you can book a whole bunch of meetings, but if the customer's account exec is not running a strong discovery call, then you can multiply the results of our program by 0. And, if you are not running a really strong pipeline management process, you can do the same. And then you get a little bit deeper and you're like, well, is nobody nurturing these accounts? Like, what happens if people aren't ready? And they're like, oh, we just don't talk to them ever again. And you're like, okay, don't get angry. Don't get angry. Don't get angry. And that was really like, I think when I hinted to the methodology, those were kind of the 4 core pieces that we've learned in the last, we've been trying to articulate this for the last couple of years, but I think the wording has come, or the core ideas have kind of come together in the last 6 months, and seeing the 2 sides of this business work together. And that's the sort of 4 core processes of outbound: meet, disco, manage, and nurture. And so meet is your process for booking meetings. Disco is your process for running discovery calls and converting, the meetings from your whichever team into pipeline or nurture. Manage is your process for managing your pipeline and to some extent your AEs. And then nurturing is your process for nurturing the accounts that aren't ready to buy yet. And so you can stay in touch and make sure that you're there when they are ready. And I think the more I look at a customer and success or failure through this lens, it adds so much more color, so much more context to where they fell down or where there might have been a gap and what we can do about it in order to make good on it or to improve it. Because at the end of the day, like, we're a very ROI driven business. If we're producing, if SDRs are producing meetings that turn into revenue, they're going to be a customer forever. And conversely, if our SDRs are producing meetings that aren't turning into pipeline, it's very obvious that there's no ROI. I'm curious, Greg, Cristina, what are your thoughts on the sort of meet, disco, manage, nurture?
Yeah, it's funny over the years, and I think a lot of salespeople fall into this category where you get dubbed, and I certainly was, as the closer. And it's just like, yeah, I'm a closer. And I was like, do you really think I just come in at the 11th hour and have a phone call and say, okay, sign on the dotted line? I'm like, do you know how many steps are required? And like, it's a dance to get to that. Like, closing is an inevitable result of a great process up until that point. Closing is almost, uneventful. It's just like, you're going to close by the time you get there because you've done your job. And if every one of those steps and stages isn't done properly, there's no way you're going to close. I don't care how good of a closer you are, right? And it's mind-boggling to me sometimes when I start working with clients and I'm looking at, how they're running a discovery call and then how they're running a demo call, and you're like, what are you doing? Like, you're missing so much information here. Why are you just pitching a bunch of stuff when you have no idea what's important to the client, right? And so, yeah, you can book a gajillion meetings off the top end. Doesn't matter. Like, it is going to fail miserably unless those other processes are in place, right?
Totally.
Yeah, and then I'm sure the meat part of that, MEET, yeah, you definitely see that. Like, we have some clients that make so much out of what we book for them. It's crazy. Like, the deals close. All the meetings that book become pipeline. We have other clients where we're maybe doing 2 to 3 times size the volume. And these are meetings that are within ICP and they just don't go anywhere. And so you definitely see that, like, hey, it has to be all 4 of these at the same time. Like, just being great at one thing, yeah, it's not really going to get you very far. You do need to sort of have that formalized process internally to make sure that when these meetings do come in, that you know how you're going to handle them and you treat them all as potential customers.
Right? Like, especially today when the hardest part, hands down, is to get the meeting. Again, with so much noise out there, the fact that you won over the other 100 emails that came in or phone calls that came in and someone's willing to sit down and have a 15-minute conversation with you, you better not screw that up. Right? Like, hard is been done. And if that other process is off, wastes of a lot of hard work that goes into getting that first meeting.
Well, and because in the past you could, right? The meat side of things was so easy. You're booking, you send 100 emails, you get 10, 12 meetings off of it. Like, I mean, maybe that was 10 years ago. But, I know some companies that were personalized emails, they were getting 5 to 10% meeting booking rates. So
Totally.
from prospect, if I prospected to 100 prospects, 5 to 10% of them would turn into a meeting. And I'm like, those are bananas rates. Those would be incredible rates now. So back when those numbers were huge, it made all the rest of it not irrelevant, but it wasn't as profitable, maybe is the right word to describe it. It wasn't as profitable to make investments in the others because it was so easy and meetings were so cheap. But now that meetings are harder to get, they're more expensive. And so now it makes sense to invest in processes and the disco and the pipeline management and the nurture. When everything was easy to book meetings, the other stuff didn't matter because you just put so much volume through and you let it filter out. But now I think the game has gotten harder. Buyers' expectations are higher, and the cheeky email with a GIF in it or the alligator thing isn't as unique as it used to be.
Yeah, it's always just, the right message at the right time to the right person is always going to book a meeting. I remember doing that as well, like GIFs and memes and stuff. Just like you'd get like such positive responses, and it feels like one day everyone woke up and said, yeah, this isn't cute anymore. And so
yeah,
it just really did feel like just one day.
I think it was COVID that kind of killed the fun. Because if you think about like all the messaging, like the messaging pre-COVID was, and maybe it was starting to die there, but I think we were kind of hitting an exponential growth curve of like the number of SDRs in the space. And then COVID happened and everybody's like, well, what do we do with our messaging? What do we say? And if you just pause for a minute and think about like, where was I at? Yeah, we lost a little bit of the fun there. I feel like, to me, that's when I think back and I'm like, you think like the crocodile in your office thing, that died a little while ago. Maybe a few years before that. And, the GIF thing worked amazingly for, it felt like a week, at least for me, and then like the GIF sizes needed to be smaller and smaller and smaller. And then it's like, okay, well, why even bother? Because it's the email deliverability hit is so huge. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because that has become so much a part of what we have to do now. Right. So when you say, what are some of the things that have changed? I never researched as much as I do now about like keeping on the pulse of it. And it's just like something that seems brand new is already super old and it's only been 5 months. Like the rate in which we're burning through these new ideas is the runway is really short now compared to what it used to be. Right. So that constant need to research and what's working and what's the new best methodology, what's the new best process, and to constantly evolve that way. That takes a ton of time. And when you invest in this and you coach on that and you teach that, it's just like, and that's done, we're doing this now. Like it's really hard to pivot that quickly, but we have to now, else you're going to die, right? Like it's just, how do you cut through the noise? It's a constant evolution.
And to me, it used to be messaging was all the work we did. Not all the work on the Accelerate side or on the pod side or sales outsourcing side. I remember that being like the most important, the most impactful work. And targeting was kind of less so because, the reply rates and the pickup rates were good enough that you could be a little bit looser with your targeting and still get a good result. And now I feel like it's almost flipped, that because the messaging isn't unique to people, because they see this all the time, that the targeting is the most important piece. And I think the one of the things that I won't go too deep into it because it literally has been the last 3 out of the last 5 podcasts I've gone to talk about AI targeting and inferences that it's had. But I do think that's one of the most exciting things that I've kind of seen in the last couple of months is just having tools like Clay that you can use to enrich your entire total addressable market and monitor for signals and then, process information with all these different enrichments, pass it to AI. And that to me kind of helps really solve the targeting, solves the complexity of building all these multiple plays. And like to Gray's point, there aren't that many teams out there that are just doing list-based prospecting anymore, where you go into Zoom Info and you download a big list and they send everybody on that list that message. I think the tactics and the plays that we're running are getting a little bit more complex, a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more targeted. Gray, I'd love to kind of throw it to you, and then we'll kind of bring it home on the whole podcast here.
Yeah. Do you want to just touch on what you said there? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question for Gray would be like, how is targeting and how is, tools like Clay become more relevant to you in the last couple months, last year?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely help. It just in terms of how efficient you can be, especially when you're launching a new idea or a new campaign. You can be so much more agile because you know that part of the piece isn't so hard to get all that data and those contacts. It's so much more streamlined.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually interesting with all this AI coming out and all these people like leveraging it. We are too, and all these new advanced tech. The thing that's like consistently true, and actually even more so, is like people, how important your people are and how important your team is, and like they're ultimately the things that are booking meetings. It's not just email volume anymore. It's not just who can do the most activity. It's how good is that person? How good is your team? And so, yeah, the best reps right now are standing out more than they ever have.
And it just kind of triggered a thought that, maybe I'll share it and then we'll kind of move on. But like, I've seen a lot of schools and teachers struggling with AI because the students are using AI to use their homework. And on the flip side, there are AI bots that read through the text and they predict how likely it is that this text was written by an AI. And I wonder if this is the next like SPF record or DMARC, or when Google implemented TensorFlow, we saw this huge decrease. Because the thing that I always struggled with is like, if AI gets so good, then why would SDRs write messaging anymore? Because if GPT can write it, then why would you bother? Because you could get very micro and very nuanced. And the thought that just occurred to me was, if these GPT detecting bots actually get up to a level of effectiveness, I wonder if that's the next piece that Google and Office 365 add in front of the inboxes to say, hey, listen, if this is X% AI or LLM generated, filter it out because it's likely to be, unpersonalized cold email.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Because I mean, we harp on personalization so much right now and being relevant, and that would just take it to the next level. It's like inexcusable now to not personalize and put the time in.
Totally. Yeah. I wonder which way it's going to go. Like, I'm not confident that that's going to happen or that that's even technically possible. I've seen some people doing that, but I think the through line is like targeting is going to be way more important regardless of what the email filters do. And I think the meet, disco, manage, nurture, like the 4 core processes, it's now even more important to sort of tightening up on those core 4 processes so you don't have any weak links or any leaks in the bucket, so to speak. This has been really fun talking about the methodology and all the new things. So thank you both for coming on, and to the listeners, appreciate your time and attention every week. We've got a new look for the podcast coming out. We've got a new website, just an updated look to the website. We're going to start publishing a lot more about the methodology, about how we do things here at Predictable Revenue, because our goal is to be that sort of, biological bootloader for your sales development team in helping you find a way to grow the company using sales development. And you can't grow the company if all you do is book a bunch of meetings and then don't do anything with them. So that's the reason we're doing this. I hope it helps, and feel free, please be in touch if there's something you think we missed, or if you'd like to, add your thoughts on the subject. Anyway, thanks everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.